For those of you, us that aren't familiar with the genomics space, I mean that's where how I know yourself, Alex, from the genomics space is like why should people care about genomics, especially people that everyday life. This is just they're just doing going about their usual duties of going and going to the office, doing their 9 to 5. Like why should people care about genomics?
Sure, I think that's a great question. Just kind of set the stage, and I have been thinking about that a lot. I guess it's because it's what we do. I think the part of genomics that got a lot of the early publicity was around the Human Genome Program, and it felt very much like science. And there was a lot of gee whiz in it, and we'll understand DNA and what the sequence is. And there was also a huge amount of optimism that we would cure all disease and everything else around that. And I'm old enough now that I'm starting to get the rhythm of these cycles. And we have a cycle of incredible enthusiasm around new medical technologies. And we're very naive. And then there's a reckoning where we realize that actually everything we thought we knew we didn't know, and that it's some very complex onion that we continue to peel. And so I feel like the heart of genomics certainly started out around the idea that we'll understand the human blueprint. And if you understand the blueprint or the diagram for something, the instructions for building it, kind of the sense that you'll just understand everything, right? We know that you put a double-stranded piece of DNA, a genome, into a cell, and it'll rebuild whatever's in the DNA. I mean, vast oversimplification, right? So it must mean everything is there. And it turned out that that wasn't the case. But we did learn a lot, and we in particular learned a lot, obviously, about cancer, because it's such a huge problem for humanity, and it's a disease of the genome. So I think, harking back to your question, the reason it's important to everyone is that we're only either 0 or 1 degree away from someone that's had a usually traumatic, if not fatal, experience with cancer. And so that becomes very important. And I think the understanding genomics has had a huge impact on not just our understanding of cancer, but us really racing along in terms of precision medicine for cancer, which has had an extraordinary, I think, Jimmy Carter is a great example, right? I can't remember how long ago his cancer diagnosis was. He had an amazing precision cancer treatment, and he is still with us, though I think coming up on 100 years old. Um, and then the other case is, and this was interesting to me as an engineer who kind of stumbled into these things, is understanding that part of it. And there's these two ways to think about it. As you think about a human, you've got your own genome, but then your bloodstream is full of the genomes of all sorts of beasts, viruses and bacteria and everything else. And we saw that during COVID. COVID, by some mechanism or another, emerged in Wuhan, China. And I believe it was first sequenced on an Illumina MiSeq sequencer. And immediately, as soon as you had that, it became perfectly clear that this was a whole new, not whole new, but anyway, it was a very new thing for our immune systems. And that led to the design very quickly of a PCR test, which there were billions of those done. And then over time, of course, led to the ability to assemble those mRNA vaccines. And so the importance of genomes is so profound, both in our own genome, but also the fact that the world is just full of the genomes of every living thing. And every time we scoop up some um, really any organic sample in general, we're going to get just this incredible mishmash of all those different genomes, and clearly can learn a huge amount about them.
That's interesting. And so you mentioned you just touched on it. Your background is in engineering. So how did you make that leap or make your way to the world of genomics and even I think more recently more on the clinical side? What was that journey like?
Yeah, so I was running a spin out of Caltech, which was an optical silicon chip company, which we founded in 2001. And I was still running it in around 2006. And two profs from Caltech, Axel Scheurer, who was with me at Bell Labs, and also David Baltimore, who got the Nobel Prize for reverse transcriptase.
Mhm.
They were both working on a high performance real time PCR instrument. and they wanted to start a company. And I literally didn't obviously know what PCR was. I never did any biology, certainly no microbiology. But I loved raising venture capital. And I said, oh, well, I'll take a little time out from my day job and I'll help you guys. Um, we'll go up to Sand Hill Road and find out. I had to find out who the bio VCs were. I had no idea because there's virtually no crossover between tech and bio VCs.
Yeah.
And then I just found myself doing it, spending more and more time on it. And I got kind of fascinated in it. I'd always been fascinated back to engineering around DNA. When I got to Bell Labs, the Bell Lab story, the first thing I did was spend a year designing a computer inspired by DNA. I thought, hey, we do all this amazing computation happens inside DNA, and there are all sorts of equivalents of, like labels on packets and packet switches, and you can draw all these analogies. And I end up painstakingly designing a whole computer from the software all the way down to the hardware based on just long streams of characters. Like, just could you build it in DNA? So I'd always been interested, got more and more interested in it. And then I remember having a meeting with a VC one day, and they said, we love this. We'd love to write a check, but we don't know who we're going to write the check to because the company doesn't have a CEO. And I thought, interesting. And went back and ended up handing over, spent about a year starting one company and doing a search for a replacement. And I think it was somewhere in 2007, we started Helixis, which became that company, was real-time PCR, as I said. And then within, I think just under 3 years, we sold that to Illumina. And so in 2010, I ended up at Illumina, completely out of my depth. It was like a company that has just launched the HiSeq, sequencing was just taking off. They just bought the PCR company, and everyone was looking around going, why on earth did we just buy a PCR company when NGS is just taking off? That's another story in itself. And then had a very, very interesting time and ended up staying there 7 years. So that's one version of how I ended up in the life science side.